All right, welcome everybody. There are some new rules that are going into effect December 9th, 2022. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get the word out and make sure that small businesses don't suffer the repercussions. There's plenty of opportunity to be compliant and meet these standards without running into any trouble. Our guest today, it is my great honor to have Guy Bavly, founder and CEO of Actifile. He is going to be picking up here towards the end of our session here, and we're going to have some discussion about how important data security is. So, Guy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Derek and Josh, for inviting me, and I'm honored to join this very interesting and important webinar. And we'll have a chance to talk afterwards and share some insights into the market.
Awesome, thank you. I'm so honored again that Guy is even here today. This is a great thing. We're all the way from Israel. Amazing.
All the way. Over Zoom.
Over Zoom. So let's talk about the FTC Safeguard rules. We want to take into consideration, is this a problem or a solution? So our governmental agencies here in the United States are well known for creating their own problems, and then on occasion they're known for bringing solutions to the table to actually solve a problem. So in the case of the FTC Safeguards Rule, which is it? The GLBA is a major law that was created in 2003. And now our regulators have updated that law to modern standards, meaning it's not just about what's on paper anymore. It's about what is in your computer systems and your data. So the best way that I have found to address this is divide and conquer. So the FTC Safeguards Rule really come down to 4 different sections. So you've got accountability, risk management, personnel management, and data security. Data security, the 4th point, is why Guy is here today. So let's talk about accountability. The FTC Safeguards requires that a business, small business, and this applies to anything that's defined as a financial institution, is a really broad term that's used. It's so broad that a auto dealership under the FTC Safeguards Rule is considered a financial institution. So for laymen, you think a financial institution is a bank or some sort of lender, but this actually comes down to auto dealerships under this law. So for those FTC compliant companies, they must do the following: designate a qualified individual who reports to the board. So you have to have a qualified person who is in charge of your cybersecurity and remaining compliant with the FTC safeguards. Change management. This is something that every business should have anyway. And most of these FTC safeguards are things that every single business should have. Change management, understanding when something gets changed on your network or in your infrastructure, what came out, what's going in, and documentation of who did it and why. High security standards for providers, such as software as a service providers. A lot of folks are under the impression that if it's in the cloud with a provider, then it's not my problem. Things like QuickBooks Online, Salesforce.com, those sorts of providers that do software as a service and store your data for you. There is always a customer responsibility matrix that basically lays out what you're responsible for and what that software provider is responsible for. The FTC Safeguard standard says that you need to make sure that your software as a service providers are at a high enough standard to meet their rules. And maintain modernity. Anybody who's around IT or around enough small businesses know that it is hard to keep up with the cutting edge of technology. So this doesn't say you always have to have the latest and greatest thing. This is saying that you shouldn't be running equipment or software systems on your network that are out of date, out of warranty, out of support, what have you. You want to keep good modern systems and software in place. Risk management is important as far as keeping your thumb on your cyber risk. So this involves cybersecurity risk assessments, continuously monitoring and reviewing, and having a written incident response plan. Now, if you are a customer of mine already, you know that these are things that I preach about all the time anyway. Every relationship that we have with a new potential customer starts with a cybersecurity risk assessment for a reason. This is part of this law for a reason. The continuous monitoring and review is not just somebody, creating tickets and seeing what's happening on your systems. It's making sure that the business leader gets a review of that information and understands what's going on also. And then a written incident plan. This is the plan that you are going to enact when you experience a data breach, or when your office experiences a fire, or when there's a hurricane or a flood or an earthquake or what have you. Having a plan for disaster recovery and for data breach is, I would say, the most important thing for any cybersecurity strategy. If you don't know what you're going to do when the what hits the fan, you're going to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. We call that a reaction. That's not a good response. That's just a reaction. So you want to make sure that you're in a responsive place when that data breach or incident occurs. So having a written incident plan is part of the FTC guidelines, and it is a requirement, and for good reason. Now we have personnel management. The word vigilantly is used. Vigilantly log users' activity. This comes down to behavioral analysis. This is not just about access control. The third item on here is access control policy and enforcement. Logging users' activity is paying attention to what your network users are doing. When they start to act in a way that's atypical, it needs to set off flags. For example, if somebody's credentials get stolen and they start to do things like download your customer list or download financial data, that needs to set off a red flag in your monitoring system, in your behavioral analysis suite, to make sure that you know who is doing what, whose credentials are being used, what information is taken, and what could potentially be done with it. So vigilantly logging users' activity goes beyond just who has access to what. And then security awareness training, making sure that everybody on your team has the tools and the understanding of how to avoid furthering a breach should it happen, and how to avoid allowing a breach in the first place. Your team is always the number one weakest point on your network. People get tricked. Good, intelligent, techie, sharp people get tricked every day into wiring money to the wrong place or giving somebody their credentials. So making sure that we do the security awareness training is very important. And finally, what we have our friend Guy here today to talk about is data security. Keeping an inventory of your data, watching your application security, such as those software as a service companies, watching the data going to and from your QuickBooks Onlines and your Salesforces and your Sage accounts, or whatever kind of software application you're using that's in the cloud. Making sure your data is secure with multi-factor authentication, purging data that you don't need anymore. The FTC Safeguards Rule says that if it's more than 2 years old, get rid of it. Now, there are certain considerations for things like legal hold. If you're in a business that requires that you hang on to data for 5 years or 7 years, I believe in the legal field, it's 7 years. In the financial industry, it's 3 years for some companies, 5 years for others. So you want to make sure that you don't have unnecessary risk laying around on your systems. If you don't need it, get rid of it. And then finally, data encryption, involving your data at rest, the stuff that's sitting on your machines and archives, and your data in motion, things that are flowing in and out of your network. So, in my personal opinion, the FTC Safeguards Rule is definitely a solution. Here's the reason. Identity theft destroys lives. The number one resource for identity thieves is the dark web. This is where they go to get their raw materials. The dark web's number one resource or raw material for identity thieves is stolen data. The source of that stolen data is data breaches. And where are 58% of those data breaches happening? Small and medium businesses. So it's these small and medium businesses that are leaving their data vulnerable. That's where it's getting stolen from. And then that leads to destroyed lives. It's a pretty simple workflow. So why is it that businesses still go unprotected? And this is a question that I've asked for several years now. Why do people still let things go and just hope for the best? Well, most people have a false sense of cybersecurity. And there are a few ways that we hear that iterated from clients or prospects that we work with. Most people think all of our data is in the cloud, we're not worried about it, or we're too small to be a target. Our IT company has us covered. Please understand that cybersecurity and risk management is not in the IT business. It's not an IT company that does these sorts of things. This is a specialty. I compare it to going to your family doctor and you need cardiovascular surgery, right? You need heart surgery. You're going to go to a cardiovascular surgeon. Your family doctor is probably a great person, probably very nice, probably very trustworthy. But when it comes to the specialty of heart surgery, you need to go to a specialist. It's the same thing with cybersecurity and risk management. So this is the silent killer. And this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot in the news. There are a lot of ways you can look up the ransomware stats in your industry or in your area, and you'll find a lot. But it's much more common than it seems to be according to the media and the news. We've experienced globally $6 trillion in ransomware thefts. This means that if ransomware cyber criminals put together all of the funds they got in their ransomware schemes and started their own country, it would be the third richest country on the planet. This is not coming from big billion-dollar hits either. This is coming $50,000, $250,000, $500,000, and sometimes in the millions when they hit, larger companies. But this is coming out of the pockets of small businesses, plumbing companies, construction companies, small insurance agencies. Their bread and butter are small businesses. You are a target because you're small. So how did this happen? The 2020 pandemic lockdown changed everything. People went home. They didn't have jobs. They were worried about their financial future, and they needed something to do. So a lot of people became cyber criminals, and we'll talk about how that happened. This has caused insurance markets to shift. Carriers are changing their policies. We have experienced a lot of changes in the forms that we have to fill out for our clients for cyber insurance applications or renewal applications. In June of 2020, those forms that I was getting were, 3-4 pages long. And then by September, they were like 11, 12 pages long. And I just got one the other day for it was like 16 pages. So they're adding more and more information into those applications so that you're more likely to get something wrong so that they can deny a claim. So on the IT side, IT providers are stumbling. Many are still unaware. And as a result, this is something that is leaving their clients sitting ducks for cyber criminals. And as a result of that, organizations are being trampled by cyber criminals, and they are diversifying their attacks. Wire fraud, identity impersonation, social engineering, ransomware, and this is just to name a few. But what you want to make sure that you understand is the results of these types of attack. Child and human trafficking, theft, identity theft, destroyed reputations of people, individuals, and their businesses. It's not just about the data. It's about the data, the people who the data belongs to. It's about what can be done with that data. When someone's email credentials are hacked or taken, compromised, and a breach occurs and somebody logs into their email, that impersonation goes a long way. From a personal note, I have a 3-year-old little girl, and she goes to a private school down the road here. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about when she started school there was the child pickup and drop-off list. Who's allowed to pick the child up from school when, how do parents add people to the list to pick them up, right? So if we want grandma to come pick her up from school today, how do we send a note to the school or get grandma on the list to pick them up? And the really fast answer from the assistant principal was just send an email. And I said, well, what if my email gets hacked? and somebody decides to add themselves to the pickup list, impersonating me. And of course, their face turns white and they say, okay, we need to change something about this. We can't do it by email anymore. So just understand that this isn't just about cybersecurity. This is not just about ones and zeros on a computer somewhere. Your organizational strategies are no longer distinguishable from your technology strategies. Further, your cybersecurity is no longer distinguishable from your physical or financial security. So that is the big why of how the FTC is starting to get involved in this, because of the people who are getting hurt and injured with data that's stolen from companies like ours, like yours and mine, where the data isn't secured enough, and or the people are not informed after the data is stolen, and then they get hurt as a result. So businesses really have two options. This is our new reality. I didn't get a vote on it. You didn't get a vote on it. I wish the world was different, but it's not. I always say we're in this business because this is important. We're not saying this is important just because we're in this business. So businesses really have two different options. Number one is resist change and just hope for the best. And in this case, you're rolling the dice and hoping you don't get caught. You hope that you don't get an audit or nothing happens. You don't get caught in the crosshairs because, maybe nobody will find out that you're not compliant. But one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, will you be above or below the $955,000 average data breach recovery cost for a small business? Is your business bigger than normal, a little bit smaller than normal? Where do you fall in that spectrum? Because that's the national average for a small business data breach recovery. That's the cost. And then on the FTC Safeguards Rule, the violation penalties are serious. Fines of up to $100,000 and incarceration up to 5 years. Jokingly, I like to say, if I'm going to risk 5 years in prison being in business, I'm going to find something else to do to make more money if I'm risking going to prison over this. So it's something to consider and make sure that you understand what the penalties of this are. It's the right thing to do. It's good business, and you're protecting yourself from some pretty horrible consequences. Option two, this is the boat that our customers are in. The thumbing your nose part of this is my perspective on the FTC safeguards. While it is important and it is a good solution to problems in a lot of ways, large corporations have lobbyists that are going to Washington. They're talking to lawmakers, they're talking to regulators, and they're telling them what they want. The big guys, the big multi-billion-dollar organizations and corporations. So it helps them a lot if the standards for cybersecurity are high, because they can attain a high standard of cybersecurity. They figure small businesses probably can't. So the same thing that makes us a target for cyber criminals is the same thing that makes us a target for large corporate lobbyists. So if the big boys can help make it more difficult for you to do business by raising those security standards and putting these regulations out that raise what you have to do to stay in business, it's easier for them to compete against you, or maybe even just put you out of business. So option two is where we like to see our customers thumbing their nose at large corporations who hope these types of regulations help eliminate you as their competition. Also, achieving a level of security that exceeds the GLBA. So the GLBA is the act that instituted the FTC Safeguards Rules. So we want you to achieve a level of security that's higher than that. And insurance compliance. So I always say your insurance compliance is about here. The requirements for the FTC guidelines is about here. We always stay just above what that insurance level is to make sure that we're ahead of the curve for you and your business. Third, we want you to be ready to recover from a data breach in a controlled and predictable manner. And at the end of all this big, expensive nightmare of a data breach, nobody can stop you from being breached. Nobody can stop it from being expensive. Nobody can stop it from being a nightmare. But what we can do is help to ensure that your insurance company foots the bill when the wolf comes to the door. When this happens to you, we make sure that our clients have a good, solid cyber insurance plan to make sure that there's somebody else who has to take on that bill once your data breach is successful and complete. So these are some challenges. I'm not going to read all these statistics, but one of them that's the biggest one that sticks out to me is the 60% of small and medium-sized businesses go under within 6 months of a breach. What happens is they experience a breach, they think they can brush it off, it's not a big deal. Somebody just got my email, I changed my password, it's not a problem. Then they get a call. Somebody's identity was stolen. There was another breach or a compromise from something that was stolen from their organization. Then the legal fees start. Now they're defending themselves in court. Now they're defending themselves in criminal court because they failed to report a felony. The former CISO of Uber did this. He covered up a breach back in 2016. When the new CISO came in, it was discovered and reported, and he was sentenced on October 7th. He was found guilty of failing to report a felony. So we're still waiting to see what his sentencing is and how long this guy's going to end up having to go to prison, or because he was the CEO of Uber, he might just have to do some community service. But I can assure you that this is not a position that you want to be in as a small business owner for failing to even report a breach. Number one way that a cyber criminal will get into your data is business email compromise. 94% of these breaches are delivered via email, and all it takes is one wrong click. This is why security awareness training, proper firewall security measures, proper email security measures, all those layers of protection between the bad guys and your team being the final stop on that road to a successful cyber attack. If they get through all of those layers of security and they end up at your team should know how to stop them. So that's what security awareness training is all about. Avoiding that one wrong click that ends your business or causes you to be out for weeks or possibly even months. So how do you keep your business and clients as safe as possible? What do we do to protect ourselves? What do we do to protect our clients? There's a couple of things we need to recognize and make sure we identify, like who is managing your risk? Is it your IT guy? Is it your CFO? Is it your board of directors? Well, I can tell you that in every situation in any business, the leader of the business always manages their own risk. So when you see the guy or the gal who has the sign on their desk that says the buck stops here, they're managing their risk. Whether you know it or not, you're managing the risk. So we want to make sure that you're doing this in a proper manner. So managing your risk is multi-layered. You want to prevent bad things from happening, but then you also want to make sure that you know when those bad things happen, even though you did everything you could to prevent them, then what, right? So you want to make sure that you are managing your risk properly. You have a good insurance plan in place. You have security that keeps you compliant with that insurance policy. You have compliance monitoring systems that keep you compliant with both the FTC guidelines, any other regulatory guidelines like HIPAA or CMMC, and your insurance. You want to make sure that you have a method by which you can discover your security weaknesses. And where do you start? This is the question that I get all the time. When we do our why you need a risk assessment presentations, this is it. Like, how do I even get through all this, right? You get through all the statistics, it just seems hopeless, right? So it's this terrible thing where all these, rooms full of cyber hackers are just after me and my business all the time. And you're telling me eventually they're going to get to me anyway, and there's nothing you can do to protect me. Well, you can protect your business. I can't keep you from getting hacked, but I can keep you from getting whacked. So how do I navigate the cyber frontier and avoid catastrophe? It seems simple. It's a 4-step process. We need to assess, secure, ensure, and review. Assessing is identifying what your risks are and your vulnerabilities. Securing is eliminating your unnecessary risk. And then ensuring your remaining risks that you have to deal with. If you're an entrepreneur, it's the French word for one who takes a risk, right? So there's always going to be a risk involved with running your business, but you want to make sure that you have an insurance policy and a backup plan for when those risks come knocking at your door. And then the last one here is the most important part. Again, without this, the other three are kind of meaningless. We have to review. We have to be regularly reviewing all of these 3 steps to make sure that everything is still in line. Things change very quickly in the technology market. Things are changing very quickly in the cybercrime market. So we want to make sure that we treat our cybersecurity and our risk management as a discipline. This is not a one-time project that you run a scan, fix some things, and then you're done. This is an ongoing discipline and management strategy. At our company, we provide all of the services that you need to make sure that you're handled from IT all the way through your cyber risk management. So the help desk, the IT management, the cybersecurity, and your cyber risk management, right down to working with your insurance agent to make sure that you have the right policy and the right level of coverage. Our system is built to take your company through these stages of risk management. So most people we start off with are at a critical level of risk. We have things we need to tidy up. We have buttons we need to press to make sure that you're secured. Once we get them to an acceptable level of risk, that's when we start shopping for insurance policies. Once your business is insured and you have a good, solid insurance company carrier behind you with a policy that you are more than compliant with, then your risk is properly managed there at stage 3. And one of the nice things about doing this is a lot of people have a nightmare IT situations that they just can't handle. It's a lot to manage, and IT management is its own field for a reason. But once these cybersecurity and risk management things are taken care of, you will have a great amount of control over your IT systems because you have to for cybersecurity. But one of the positive byproducts of that is it becomes really easy to start integrating new things. It starts becoming, once you have this perfect machine that's built and humming and purring like a kitten, it's much easier for you to add things onto that and integrate new things into your business. And once you're flexible and able to have the agility of a company that's highly integrated and highly changeable, then you can scale. Whether it's growing your business or passing off leadership to someone else so that you can maybe enjoy retirement, whatever direction you want to scale your business in, it's much easier to do when you're integrated and integratable. So we're going to be sending out an email. And I'm going to drop it in the chat here also. We have a 30-minute FTC Safeguards Rule compliance review. You can do it one-on-one with me. I will join you on a Zoom meeting, and I'll be happy to go through all of our checklist compliance. In fact, we're going to include our policy writing kit. This is the kit that we use to get our new customers compliant on the policy side. So one thing I've seen business owners and leaders struggle with is we've got all these policies we need to talk about, like what our incident response plan is and bring your own device policy and what our password policy is going to be. Like, how do I even write any of the stuff that I'm required to have for these compliance standards? Well, we have a kit that we use. We have to do this 10,000 times a day, so it's not that big of a deal. We can roll through that kit with you and give that to you to at least get you started on the policy writing side. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my friend, Guy Bavly, founder and CEO of Actifile, to talk about data management and data discovery.
Okay, so Derreck, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was detailed and results oriented, and I think we can safely say that data security is one part of the presentation, but it touches all parts of it, in different sections, because data is the most important asset that every organization has. And data is, at the end of the day, any privacy regulation aims to protect the data, the sensitive data, the personal data of your customers. So I think that's something we want to go deep and discuss today.
So from your perspective, looking at a small business like a say an insurance agency with 5 or 10 people, what do you think the number one thing they can do to protect their data that's on their systems is?
First of all, and foremost, you cannot protect what you don't know of. It's a kind of, if I'm assuming if you're insuring your house, your private home, there's an appraiser coming, he's doing assessment, trying to at least once understand what type of valuable things you've got at home. If we are aiming to protect data, and that's in the core of any privacy regulation, eventually they're trying to help you, and I agree with you, that's a solution and not the problem. I think the regulator in his unique way is trying to guide and encourage any type of organization, but specifically small and medium businesses, to protect themselves from the events that all of them are trying to steal your data and then shame you, in different places. So the first step to answer your question is visibility. Visibility starts with a good data risk assessment, which is part of your MSP business. You start by doing data risk assessment like an appraiser, scouting, home, counting the number of precious, items you've got at home. And the most important thing is not just to do data risk assessment in a technical way that, some IT managers do. You've got that number of records and those amount of files. We can to show you how much risk there is in a US dollar monetary value. We can say, and by the way, from the thousands of SMBs and SMEs like your customers, Derek, from our experience, from the thousands of customers we ran on our system, it's in the range between $4 and $10 million worth of risk. So there is a substantial risk at every organization. So to start, first of all, as part of the risk assessment that every organization should do, a key aspect of that is data risk assessment. Show me how much data I have at risk across my organization in different locations, and show me that in monetary value, which connects to all the following investments that you need to do and justify them, and explain to yourself why are you doing that. And you presented a very interesting number of $900,000, I think was $955,000. So if we run a data risk assessment and we show that you have valuable, data, sensitive data, personal information, credit card, social security number, different types of personal information, it's certainly above $1 million or $950,000, that definitely calls for action, right?
Yeah, and just as a note, where Guy and I met was at a cybersecurity conference, and he got up on the stage and was giving a talk about the data security, and used a stat that he just repeated. Is it 2 to $10 million or 4 to $10 million in data?
4 to 10.
So $4 to $10 million. And I actually pulled up a report that I had on a risk assessment we were doing at that time, where we had a customer who thought everything was in the cloud. We got nothing on our computers. One server in their building, they've got about a 20 person operation. Their one server had $9.5 million worth of data on it. And that's, and I had pulled Guy aside and showed him that assessment that we were doing, and we've been buddies ever since.
Yeah, and we took a picture of that, and it's all over our social network right now. No, really, there is a notion with SMBs, you mentioned that earlier, that they're not going to be the target, they're too small and so on. As a matter of fact, and that's a very interesting statistics as well, hackers don't like to work very hard, really don't. And they have automated tools. So they're scanning. It's like, think about it. It's a burglar that doesn't need to come to your house. He's checking all the doors and all the windows in the neighborhood. And wherever he sees an open door, he goes in. You don't need to work, really. You just sit and let, automated tools to work with you. And if someone gets in, oh, by the way, your negligent employees, which is another aspect. We're thinking about hackers. Your negligent employees, which are not malicious, by the way, they want to be productive. So they're sending things via WhatsApp, web, or via Skype, or any other productivity tool they found on the internet. And suddenly all of that information is in the dark web because someone even, didn't even bother to come to your network, is fetching it from somewhere in the internet. So yeah, and those numbers, by the way, that I'm saying between 4 and 10, this is based not on industry, benchmark. This is based on thousands of customers that have done data risk assessment, US customers with Actifile, and those are the numbers. And of course, there is a correlation between the size of the organization and the numbers, but it's not to say that the 10 or 20 people organization have less than $500,000 risk. It's not like that. It really depends on how much they're interacting with customers, how much data they're keeping, how good are they in purging data, if at all. Most organizations don't bother. So again, start with a good data risk assessment, and start with an MSP, by the way. That's important. Small and medium businesses, and we're seeing MSPs and their customers. I'm talking even up to 200 or 300 people organization, sometimes even more. Even if you have an IT person, he doesn't have the right security or specifically data security qualifications or experience. And with the shortage of IT people, there's no way you as a business owner can do it by yourself. So my recommendation is find a good MSP, and Derreck and Josh are definitely representing a good MSP with best practices, good tools in place. Actifile is one of them, but not just Actifile. You need an array and good methods that not only do risk assessment, once a year, they are monitoring you 24/7 with a good data risk monitoring tool. Why? Because things change. One of your employees might download a list of customers with their credit cards from your bank account and leave it as an Excel file. Okay, perfectly harmless, no intent. It's not even taking something out. For a hacker, this is something he preys on. Okay, so that's important. And eventually, you want to go even beyond that, and we might talk about that later on. Start with the data risk assessment, monitor for good audit at all times. Audit all times. That's something a tool like Actifile does. So God forbid if there is an audit or breach, at least you know how much data you have, where was it, what type, and how much risk there was. So the insurer or the auditor that comes afterwards, or the incident response team, don't need to think that everything was stolen. And eventually, the best way to prevent all of that is to be preemptive. And imagine you could put next to each and every piece of jewelry in your house a small thing on top of it that keeps the jewel, as a jewel, but makes it, unusable when someone takes it out of your home. That's exactly what Actifile does. We protect, without going into too many technical details, we protect with a very strong encryption those files. And if someone steals them or misplaces them, they cannot be opened. And that's the way that protects you in the best way ever. This patented approach. And for you, it's seamless. You don't need to bother with users and passwords, all of those files, because you have a Actifile on your machine, then they're decrypted. Eventually, what I think Derreck and Josh are doing at the end of the day is taking big organization, big corporation work method and making them consumable to you as a small medium enterprise. Don't settle for less, because at the end of the day, this is critical for you. And again, the FTC regulation is something you need to obey with, but eventually it's a good method for you as an opportunity to improve yourself, because it will happen to all of us, but you need to be preemptive on that.
I'm glad you brought up the employees doing things on your network that are seemingly innocent but can lead to major catastrophe for a business. In the industry, we call it shadow IT. But one of the things that we have noticed with Actifile is it helps to identify, when we go in, we do a deep dive on our risk assessments. It's not just a quick penetration test and, give us a week or two and we'll find some reasons that we can scare a business owner into doing business with us. We do a deep dive into your data and into your systems using tools like Actifile. But one thing specifically that's Actifile related was a staffing company that we're actually doing a review for right now. They have apps like Job Diva. They're using Interseller through, and it sets up a LinkedIn Navigator, and they have Google Workspace. Everything is in the cloud. They don't keep anything on their computers. This, anyway, is their perspective before we're doing before we did the risk assessment. So, these businesses have this idea, going back to that false sense of cybersecurity that I was talking about earlier, that idea that everything is in the cloud and everything is safe. Well, you never really know what your employees are doing to be more productive during the day. They pull little spreadsheets down, or they make little Word documents with notes in them, with passwords, things like that. And we call that in business, we call that shadow IT. Okay, so these are the things that are happening in the shadows, and it's not anything intentionally nefarious, but it's things that are making you vulnerable without you knowing about it. So in this one example, we were running their Actifile analysis. Actifile identified for us some files with PII, personally identifiable information. So that comes right down to first and last name. If you have somebody's first and last name on your system, the laws consider that to be PII. And then you start adding layers in, like email, like driver's license numbers, like social security numbers, home addresses, things like that. So this staffing agency had a list of 27 people that they had staffed at an organization. The list was from 2019. It wasn't even, this is something that hadn't been opened or edited since 2019. So 3 years later, the stuff is still sitting on their system. There are 27 people with basically all their employment information, everything except for their mother's maiden name, which you can go on social media and get in about 10 minutes. So, when you turn around, you show somebody like that, and it was the vice president of operations that had this on her computer in her downloads file. It wasn't, it's not, she's one of the people that's, pushing to get this done because she's concerned about cybersecurity. So, using a tool like Actifile with your intelligent solution, being able to target those specific items that are on someone's system, so we can say, all right, we're getting rid of all this, or we need to encrypt that, or these are the types of files we need to keep in a secured cloud system, whatever. Moving that stuff around and making sure that the stuff that you do have to keep is secure is a great way for Actifile. And then to Guy's point about using an MSP, a tool like Actifile is only as good as the person who's using it. So you want to make sure that you have a good system behind the management of that tool and the application of that tool. So Actifile is extremely powerful. That's why we use it. And the Actifile team only works with managed services providers in the IT industry. And we work with a lot of companies that have these amazing solutions like this, and they all have their different reasons for just working with MSPs. But my reason for being an MSP that focuses on small businesses are, I'm a small business. I know the pains and the struggles of being a small business owner. So the people that are watching this video are dealing with a lot of the same issues that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. Right. So I tend to understand a small business better than I understand, a huge billion-dollar corporation. However, we have a customer that we're working with now who has they have 500 employees. They are an auto dealership that now has to meet the FTC Safeguards rules. They have a full-time IT staff of half a dozen people on their IT staff, and they've been working all year to get to that level of compliance they need. And now they're starting to look around and say, okay, now what do we do? We're not gonna make the deadline. So that sort of company, even with 500 computers, just doesn't have the tools available or the systems to leverage, because there are channel-only products or channel-only services that are available to a managed service. So I would love it if you called me. But definitely insist that you call a managed service provider who is not just an MSP, but an MSSP. You need a managed services and security provider to make sure that this stuff is managed properly. So I think we've covered just about everything. And I don't want to end this. I'd like to hang out with you all day.
Yeah. So first of all, Derreck and Josh, thank you again for inviting me. It was a lot of fun. And please reach out to Derreck and Josh with follow-ups. And I think the way that if we look at the market, Derreck, we're talking about FTC today, but CCPA started with California. There are already 8 states that copied CCPA, the California privacy regulation, which is very similar to the European GDPR. And I'm assuming all states will follow them, in due course. So it's not to say that FTC is the only reason why doing it. If you're not a healthcare organization, if you're not a financial organization that already have regulations in place, you have FTC right now. Tomorrow morning, you'll have a state, regulation. It's only a matter of time, and not just because, I wouldn't say just because of regulation do it. I agree with you that the regulation is an incentive call for action. So do that. Make yourself, work with a serious MSSP like yours. Choose the right tools, that build them in a way that combines not only the risk assessment, but also the remediation while ongoing monitoring. And by the way, you mentioned people, exfiltrating and so on. We see on a regular basis hundreds of thousands of dollars leaving the organization in different places on a weekly basis. So hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of risk of different sensitive files.
Guy, have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.